And we're live. And on this episode of Book Chat Live, we have the amazing Dr. Carol Cooper. I felt it would be more informal in the show graphics than Carol Cooper, but you are Dr. Carol Cooper. So
yes, but I'm very happy to be informal.
Yes. So for anybody who isn't aware of your wonderful writing and work and your literary experience, can you briefly say what kind of books you write and what kind of books you like?
I like a variety of books, and they've all had, I think, an influence on me in some way. The kind of books I write are funny and frank, I think, and although they're often very light in tone, they deal with some very serious subjects. And my novels have been both contemporary and a bit more historical, recent history, I should say. And they always contain at least one doctor among the cast, and usually some kind of medical puzzle or conundrum at the heart of the plot, which in fact reflects my experience as a medic.
Okay, right.
I like my cast to be multicultural.
Yeah.
And I like to use settings that I know well. Place is very, very important to me, and so is nostalgia. And I would say my novels are character-led. The characters have all got real lives. They're juggling with problems, with relationships, with things going wrong, and so on.
Okay. Well, shall we get into your first book recommendation?
Yes, indeed.
The one I can't pronounce properly, The Eucubian Building by
It's The Eucubian Building.
Yeah.
And if you have trouble with the title, you'll have more trouble with the author.
I know, that's why I gave up.
Who's Ayla Al-Aswani. And it's set in Cairo.
Yeah.
I've got the hardback. I don't buy that many hardbacks, but I've got the hardback, and the author signed it for me. When I met him at the London Book Fair in about 2008, and he actually encouraged me to write about Egypt. He is a dentist by trade, and we had a bit to talk about. And I'd lived in Egypt, although not so much in Cairo, where this book is set. And it's Ayla Al-Aswani's second novel, and I think actually his best. It's based in a very real building in Cairo. I mean, so real that he once worked in it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But he's taken a few liberties with the architecture and so on.
Yeah.
And all the characters are linked with this building. So there's an aged aristo who's totally obsessed with sex. There's a newspaper editor who uses the building as his office. And there's the doorman's son, Taha, who he's very devout Muslim. He's about 17 or 18 years old when the book opens, and he wants to join the police force.
Yeah. So what particularly appealed to you about this book then? Was is it because of your connection with Egypt? I mean, to a wide audience.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, the book, this building itself is a once grand building, which is now faded. And I think it's very much a symbol of what happened to Egypt and is still happening.
Yeah.
And I love the way Al-Aswani has mixed fiction, total fiction, with the real things that affect people in Egypt, notions of class. And that's one of the reasons that poor Taha, the doorman's son, it's not so easy for him to join the police force.
Yeah.
He's the wrong social class.
Okay.
And there's also a good deal of corruption, of patronage, and so on. So I think it's a very real depiction of Egypt, at the same time being very entertaining.
Okay. Well, shall we move on to the next book?
Sure.
Then, which is The Photograph.
Yes. Well, this is Penelope Lively's novel, The Photograph. I can't remember when it came out, but I've reread it several times, and I think she's an exquisite storyteller. And she actually was raised in Egypt, but I haven't chosen a book that's set in Egypt. I've chosen this one. And the photograph of the title is a photo that Glyn, aging widower, finds one day when he's looking for an academic paper in his study. And he finds a sealed envelope with "Don't open this, destroy it" on it. So what do you think he does?
He opens
He
it,
opens
obviously.
it.
Doesn't he? Yeah.
And it shows his late wife, Kath, holding hands with her own brother-in-law.
Mm.
So there's a relationship there that nobody knew about, that shouldn't have happened. And it unleashes all sorts of events. Well, of course, Glyn wants to investigate this. He wants to investigate what he sees as a betrayal. Kath's sister wants to throw her husband out. And it forces all relationships to be re-examined, whole lives reassessed. And it also looks quite a lot at what happens to memory. We have our memories are leaky vessels, and they don't retain everything, and some of the things they retain shouldn't be there. The timeline goes back and forth a bit, and it also goes about the points of view of different characters, which I think is particularly effective for a book like this. And eventually it reveals something about each of the people, including the deceased Kath.
Yeah. Okay. And
So
how did you?
Sorry.
How did you find the book in the first place? Have you read other works?
I'd read most of Penelope Lively's
Yeah.
books, including children's books. And I've always loved her writing. I think the first one I read was her award-winning Moon Tiger.
Yeah.
But this one is the one that's really stuck with me.
Yeah.
I think, for what it has to say about memory and betrayal.
Yeah. Okay. Well, should we go into the next book, which has also got an Egyptian theme, which is
this is my latest novel.
Yes, by this Carol
The
Cooper
Girls
person.
from Alexandria, and it's set in Alexandria, where I grew up.
Yeah.
My mother's family is Egyptian, of Levantine origin, so they're Syrian and Lebanese, but they moved to Egypt in the 1860s. So essentially, they became Egyptian. And you can see it's got a touch of the Lolitas about it, I think.
Yeah.
The cover, I think, is pretty attractive. But the story doesn't start anywhere near Alexandria. It's got a dual timeline, and it starts when Nadia, the central character, and she and her sister are the girls of the title. It opens with Nadia, who's now age 70, and she's losing her mind. She's in a London hospital because the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her, and they think her brain is failing, and it could be quite serious. And at this point, she has no relatives left. She's not in contact with any of them. She believes her sister is around, and she's desperate to find her. But the snag is that her sister left Egypt in the mid-1960s, and it's hard.
Ooh.
All she's got are some old photos and postcards. And she's stuck in a bed. And what can she do to find her sister?
Yeah.
So she revisits all the old memories of when she grew up. And this is where the Alexandrian atmosphere comes in, and the Alexandrian side of the story. So it goes back to the 50s and 60s. She's trying to re-examine things that she may have, were there clues that she missed when she was younger?
Yeah.
Are there important clues? So that's what the story is. And it's an exotic location, but it's also a coming-of-age book in many ways. And it does have a medical conundrum. And there's a lot as well about the meaning of home, which I think ties in with my own cultural origins. So it's a book that meant a lot to me in writing. And I think also a bit like the Yacubian building, it deals with, Alexandria and Cairo, two very different places. And there's a lot of rivalry between them. But it's also a faded grandeur. It's not what it was. And I'm describing a world that no longer exists.
Yeah, well, that's true for a lot of people in every culture, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is this a standalone book, or is it going to be part of the
series?
No,
this one's standalone completely. Yeah. I am working on another one, but it's not going to be set in Alexandria. It's got different characters.
Okay.
So it's totally standalone, and will remain so.
Yeah, you're not going to suddenly write A Girl from Alexandria 2. And,
well, Nadia's 70.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's a bit
at the end of the book, so
Yeah.
Is-
Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next book?
Sure. Well, this one, I imagine a lot of people talk to you about this one.
No, but then, yeah.
By Joanna Cannon. And it's also a book with a dual timeline, which I really like. There's also a book about coming of age as well. The setting may not be exotic. It's actually in an East Midlands suburb.
Oh, okay.
But the writing is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And what happens is it's 1976, in the heat wave of 76, which Joe Cannon's writing brought back everything about that summer when it was so hot and there was no water and we were advised to share baths. Anyway, back to her story. She's got 10-year-olds, Grace and Tilly, decide to investigate rumors that they overheard in a suburban street. And this sparks off a summer of sleuthing. Mrs. Creasy has disappeared from number 8, and they're determined to find out what happened. And they're also looking for God, which, considering he's meant to be everywhere, is proving quite difficult.
Yeah.
And he's certainly not in the church hall because that's where all the naughty rumors are. And I think the characters are absolutely wonderful. Apart from Grace and Tilly, the 10-year-olds, there's a 43-year-old man still living with his mum and growing his hair to catch girls. There's Sheila from down the road who lolls in a deck chair in her bikini all the time when she's not drinking the cooking sherry.
Yeah.
There's a deeply disturbing man called Walter at number 11. And everybody's talking about him being a pervert. Or is he a pervert or is he not a pervert? And did he have anything to do with certain other events? So it's a very entertaining book, but it has got quite a lot of deeper issues, I think. It's about how secrets can lie hidden for decades, how people can be whipped up into a mob. And this makes a lot of serious points, but overall it's a very, very enjoyable book to read. And I love the way Joanna Cannon writes.
So would you say that books like this one have influenced your own writing? I mean, have you read them? Now, well, I mean, I don't know when you read this book, but do you feel that you bring part of the lessons learned from reading this to your own work, or is it more just I mean, you're presumably not going to write your next book in the East Midlands, but there probably are other elements of the book that you want to.
Well, firstly, I always set my book somewhere that I know very well.
Yeah.
So I would have to spend a lot more time in the East Midlands before I was able to do that. And I think what did influence me is her dual timeline. And in fact, the earlier time period is about 1967, and then 9 years later than that. And her 76 time is actually written in the past tense.
Oh, okay.
67 is written in the present tense, which is an interesting way of doing it, but it works really well because the present tense brings you immediacy, but it doesn't have to be immediacy now. It's the immediacy of actions and events then. So they seem more real in a way.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, well, should we go on to the next book, which I think I've actually heard of?
Yes.
The Go-Between.
You didn't ask me if they found God. But
well, I think a lot of people that's a spoiler for a much wider show than this one, I suspect.
Okay, well, the next one is The Go-Between.
Yeah.
Which I've read several times. I think I first read it when I was a teenager. And you know that phrase, the past is a foreign country. Yeah. They do things differently there. Well, that's where it comes from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it was published in 1953. So the past that is being referred to is not actually 1953. It's 1900.
Yeah.
It's another coming of age novel, if you like, and it's dripping with nostalgia. So, as I said, the action takes place in 1900, which is the summer when our principal character, Leo, turns 13. And he is spending the summer with a school friend of his called Marcus. And Marcus is younger in age, but ever so much more elevated in social status. So Leo and his mother live together in a fairly modest home, but Marcus and his family, well, they're actually landed gentry.
Yeah.
So he's staying in a stately home, and so the host family have ways of doing things that he's not used to, and really the only familiar reference point is Marcus, and there's some brilliant schoolboy banter between the two of them, which is hugely enjoyable. And it's funny how, okay, that's dated, it's 1900, but it really hits a contemporary nerve as well, I think. I'm not giving much away if I tell you that the crux of the matter is a clandestine affair between Marcus's sister, older sister, and someone who is totally unsuitable. And it puts Leo, the visitor, in a very difficult situation because he's the go-between with messages from one to the other and back again. And ultimately, it's this relationship that scars him permanently. I think looking back, some might call him a snowflake. But, you know, at 12 going on 13, that's a very awkward and impressionable age. And it is very traumatic for him. And the book is really about trauma in childhood.
Yeah.
And it's also about class differences and the significance of memory. Again, I'm a little bit obsessed with that. It's about memory loss and its recovery. And memories often idealize the past, but they can also recall horrors that come back to haunt, as I think they do in this book. I won't get any more specific than that. It is a beautiful book.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to the next one, which is At the Stroke of 9 O'Clock by Jane Davis, who I've actually met the author.
Have you?
Yes.
He's a remarkable author.
Yeah.
I should probably hold it this side so you can see it better against the plain background, because there's a lot going on the cover.
Yeah.
And it's, if you like, an ensemble novel with overlapping stories, and they overlap like a Venn diagram. It takes the reader into three quite different worlds, I would say. It's set in London in 1949 and about 5 years after that. And the one character is Caroline. She's 17 and she has to work to support her family back in Felixstowe, I think it is. So she leaves Felixstowe to seek her fortune in London. And she's very attractive. Modeling is a possibility. But surprise, surprise, doors don't open that easily. And she ends up being a hostess at a club.
Oh, okay.
Then there's Ursula, who's a star of stage and screen, recognizable everywhere. And she left her husband and she's now pregnant by her married lover. But lover shows no signs of leaving his wife as he'd promised to. And in fact, the wife is now expecting a baby as well. So things are not going too well for Ursula.
Yeah.
The one, Patrice and her husband Charles, they are landed and they are loaded. So those are the three main female characters, Caroline, Ursula, and Patrice. Anyway, they're landed and loaded for now. But the trouble is that Charles has a gambling habit.
Yeah.
And he can't be trusted with anything that could potentially be sold.
Yeah.
And soon Patrice's family home is at stake.
I like the way you're kind of saying enough, but you're avoiding the spoilers. I can see.
Yes, I am. I'm going to tell you a little bit more because the next part of it is true. Yeah. So these three lives, fictional lives, overlap when there's a very real life, Ruth Ellis, whom you may have heard of. She was the last woman in Britain to be hanged.
Yeah.
And that happened in 1954. And Ruth Ellis was convicted of murdering her lover and she was sentenced to death. And this is the event that brings these three women together.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like It's like, well, the worst example in a way is these sort of JFK ones where somebody's interleaved a fictional story into the JFK thing, but this sounds a bit more
Yes. Yeah.
sort of I can't think of the right word, but much more poignant.
Yeah, it's very. I mean, Ellis's lover, quite honestly, he steals from her, he cheats on her, he punches her in the stomach so badly that she loses their baby. So then she shoots him outside a pub in Hampstead, about a mile from where I'm sitting now. And I mean, I'm not hugely surprised that she shot him. And then she fesses up.
Yeah.
And gets hanged. This is, the early 50s. People, again, your memories of the past.
People idolize,
Yeah, we think it's such a wonderful time, values and all this stuff. But it was a very bleak time for women, particularly. A woman's consent or wishes counted for nothing whatsoever.
Yeah.
And all three women in Jane Davis's book face really difficult situations, and they have to become resourceful. And ultimately, it's a sisterhood, the bond between them, that helps them.
Yeah.
Which I think is very interesting and, if you like, universal. And if you don't know Jane Davis's books, they're all very atmospheric with wonderful characters. I'm going to show you this one again, but they're all great, and she's won awards for several of them. So I think you will not be wasting your time if you read one of her books. But that's my favourite.
It's a standalone book again. It's
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think all her books are, actually. I may be mistaken. This one is certainly a standalone book. Now, she often sets her books in different historical time periods.
Yeah. Okay, well, shall we switch over to a different author who may be closer to home?
Well, this one is another one of mine. So
yes.
This was my debut novel.
Oh.
And I wanted to write a book with an ensemble of unrelated characters, all of them looking for love. And the thing is, they've all got baggage, and they're not particularly proud of what they're carrying. So they reinvent themselves, or to put it bluntly, they lie. And I think the only serious point really is, can a lasting relationship exist on a foundation of lies? But the book itself is not serious. As also, I should mention, it's a little bit racy in places. But this Sanjay, so he's not about to tell anyone that he's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. There's Jeff, he's a doctor, but every time he tells people he's a doctor, he gets a bucket of symptoms thrown at him to sort out. There's Laura, who's half Lebanese, and she's a lawyer, but that tends to frighten some men off.
Yeah.
So she says she's a hairdresser. And then there's a deeply weird accountant for a publishing company, and there's a newly single mum of 4. And then there's a journalist called Harriet, and she's gone speed dating along with all the others. She's lying too, because actually she already has a live-in lover.
Oh,
she's not looking for a boyfriend. She's looking for material for a feature that she's writing called The 7 Ages of Dating. So she's there to pick up information. But, the evening is confusing, chaotic, and each encounter is very brief. But some of them are going to see each other again, and it's going to evolve from there.
So how is it actually? Is it One Night at the Jacaranda? Is it
Jacaranda. Well, the Jacaranda is the name of a pub. It isn't. I invented it. The Jacaranda is the name of a bar in Mayfair. Maryland.
Yeah.
There is a real bar called the Jacaranda, but it's not in London. But the one I've invented is in Marylebone, so it's quite upmarket, and that's where the speed dating event is. And I mean, it was the ideal starting point. I think it's a bit trite these days to write a book about speed dating, but I wanted a way of bringing in into one room all the different characters who are all single or purporting to be single. And I also wanted to write it in such a way that you wouldn't know who was going to end up with who.
Yeah.
So I didn't want the reader to guess beforehand. So if you only have certain points of view, you know what's going to happen, more or less.
So did that do well? Did that launch you into a world of
It did.
Or?
I mean, it did in a way, because it was a quarter finalist in the Amazon Breakthrough Award, and it did so pretty well. And I had a Kindle deal on it, which made it do even better. So it did all right. It's not enough to retire from everything else.
Well, yeah, very few people really earn that.
But I'll tell you what, the way in which it was a success is that it persuaded me to carry on writing.
Yeah, I suppose that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, shall we move on to the next book?
Yes.
Which is The Group by Mary McCarthy.
I love this one. Well, I haven't chosen any books I don't like.
Yeah, well, that would be a bit weird.
The Group. And this, when I was writing One Night at the Jacaranda, I was trying to work out how I could get all these people into one place at a time. What device could I use?
Yeah.
And Mary McCarthy has made her 8 characters go to the same university.
Yeah.
So they've all graduated from Vassar in 1933. And it's set in the 1930s, but there are a lot of contemporary themes. And it's frank and it's funny, and no topic is barred. Yeah. Especially not sex, relationships, and contraception. Mm-hmm. I remember it sent ripples through the US when it was first published, which was in 1963. I mean, obviously, there are some things that mark it out as, well, you can see the way they're dressed for a start. Yeah. But there are some things that mark it out as being of its time. So, for example, if a woman's 23 and not married, she's an old maid. Yeah. And if someone behaves really badly, he's a bad hat, rather than being a 4-letter word as one might use today.
Yeah.
And sex appeal was discussed, but the letters SA were used.
Yeah.
Instead of the full words. And I think it's also written in a slightly old-fashioned way. There are long paragraphs with a lot crammed in.
Yeah.
But they just carry you along. It's so beautifully written. And then you never know when in the middle of something quite mundane, a risque conversation will pop up. And they're very interesting historical pegs as well. I think it's a fantastic book. It starts with a wedding, one of the 8 women's wedding. So it starts with Kay Strong's wedding, which of course is another way of getting everybody in one place.
It's not a wedding, yeah.
Yeah, and it covers the next few years and what happens to these 8 women.
So how did you come across that book in the first place? Because it sounds like it's from the 1960s. Was it something that was recommended to you, or did you...
I remember when my mother bought it.
Oh.
This isn't her copy.
Yeah.
We were living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and everybody started talking about it. And she was saying, "Oh, I've got to read this. I've got to read this. I've got to read The Group. I've got to read The Group." And I could hear her talking to her friends about reading The Group. And it stayed in the bestseller list for, I don't know, a year.
Yeah.
So I knew of it at an age when I was far too young to read such things.
Yeah. So you remembered it, and then it was like, oh, yeah.
I want to read that.
Yeah.
Was it as bad as she'd said?
Yeah.
Or as good as she'd said? So, yeah, it was considered very risque, very juicy.
Yeah. Okay.
We wouldn't think so now, I don't think.
Well, no, but in some ways it's interesting to read books that were risque at the time, because you see them encroaching on subjects in much more subtly than people do now. And I kind of miss the subtlety that people have with difficult subjects.
Yes, yes.
Anyway,
And I love some of the language as well. You know, Bad Hat. I really love that.
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, shall we go on to the next book, which is
Oh, that's
Hamster
also
Fever? It's also raunchy,
this.
isn't it?
In a way, I wrote this as a sequel to One Night at the Jacaranda,
Oh,
but it works perfectly well as a standalone story, and it has characters that anybody would recognize. Really, I think there's an anxious mother whose baby's every sniffle make panic.
yeah,
There's there's a GP who has a fling with his patient. That doesn't happen very often, but I thought, it could happen in my book.
yeah.
Um, and there's, characters that I think would resonate with most people. And again, the cast is multicultural.
Yeah.
It's set in Hampstead, which is an aspirational, but also quite expensive. So our freelance journalist has a lot of trouble paying her bills, for example.
Yeah.
And it's a particularly hot summer. It's set in the heat wave of 2013.
Yeah. So it's a bit like the 76, but updated.
Yes, although it's yes, I think the grown-ups really it goes the heat goes to their head, and they
Yeah.
end up making mistakes that they really shouldn't have made. They know better. And through it all, you get life, parents fighting for custody, people worrying about jobs, children falling ill, grandparents getting old, and so on. And
Does
people
it include?
relationships.
Does it have any of the characters from One Night in the Jacaranda?
Yes, it has several of them.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
but people don't need to read.
No, absolutely not. It works on its own, and like my other books, it's got red on it.
Oh,
I always like a bit of red on the cover.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have a theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
How many books have you written in total?
Oh, well, I've written a lot of non-fiction books as well.
Oh, okay.
So I'm working on my fourth novel,
Yeah.
and but I've written probably a dozen non-fiction books, and the books that I started writing first, which I did alongside medical practice. I wrote about child health, pregnancy, twins,
Yeah.
workplace health, and so on. And I've co-authored a couple of textbooks of general practice.
But yeah, it's your fiction that is your.
Yeah, I always wanted to write fiction. And
Yeah.
if truth be known, I always wanted to live in Hampstead and write novels.
Yeah.
And dreams can come true.
Yeah. Well, let's end the show with that. No, we've got
No,
the other books.
we've got more fantastic books.
We go on, and the next book is Man and Boy by Tony Parsons.
Oh yeah, I just adore this book.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the film, and in a way, I don't really want to. Again, it's about people making mistakes when they ought to know better.
Yeah.
Tony Parsons is a very versatile writer, and he's got a new thriller coming out. He's written these books like Man and Boy, which I think are very emotional reads.
Yeah.
And very contemporary, but he also writes thrillers. I consider this his finest book. I feel it is really him, with deadly serious subjects and quite a tug on the emotions, but written in a very lovely way.
So what particularly appeals to you about that book without spoiling it in any way?
It's got a child in it.
Yeah.
It's got a marriage and a child, and I think children in books appeal to me.
I noticed that on some of your previous books.
Yes, yeah, I think so. And if an author can write well about children, I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah.
Children in books, and animals too, for that matter, but mainly children, they can take over a book.
Yeah.
To make them realistic, they have to intrude on everything, and that can sometimes wreck the action. So I think you can tell when someone's got children and writes well about children. And in this book, I have to tell you what happens, because I think I'll tell you what it starts with. We've got 30-year-old Harry, and he's married to the love of his life. And they have a beautiful little boy who's 4, and he has a great job. And in a moment of madness, he has a one-night stand. He loses his job as well as his wife. And he has to face the consequences and learn from his mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's the story. And although he's not a character I like very much, if at all, I mean, you sow, you reap.
Yeah.
But Tony Parsons has such a way, and such a lightness of touch, and a beautiful way of writing about emotions without being saccharine.
Yeah.
That I take my hat off to him. It's a very moving book. But you know what? Amazon's had quite a lot of mixed reviews.
Yeah.
And maybe it's one of these Marmite books, as we call them. But in my view, it's deservedly a bestseller.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Shall we go on to the next book, which again I've actually heard of?
Yes.
To be able to actually tell you the story, Our Man in Havana.
Well, this copy cost me 3 shillings and 6pence.
Oh.
And which is about 17.5 pence, if I'm right. And I love it for many reasons. The place and setting are very important to me.
Yeah.
So that's one immediate draw. But I think above all, it's just a wonderful novel that teeters on a razor's edge between comedy and disaster.
Yeah.
And that's where its appeal lies, I think. It owes more than a little bit to Evil and War, I would say.
Yeah.
Although, because it's Graham Greene, there's quite a lot of alcohol in it. Your characters, so it takes place in Havana, obviously, and your characters start by having a morning daiquiri for breakfast, and they go on to an afternoon daiquiri and so on. And pretty soon they're playing chess with miniature bottles. So a lot of booze. But that is not the main thing in the story. It was published in 1958. And in many ways, I find it strangely prescient, because this was 4 whole years before the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
What happens is Jim, the man in Havana, he's a vacuum cleaner salesman. And he's not terribly handy with vacuum cleaners. And also because Havana has lots of power cuts, there isn't much of a market for vacuum cleaners. So he's not very successful. And he's also not very successful at curbing the spendthrift wishes of his daughter, Millie, who was 17. But if he doesn't supply the expensive things she wants, then some totally unwholesome man will. So when he's offered the possibility of becoming an MI6 agent, when he's invited to join a spy ring and make extra money, how can he resist?
Yeah.
So he becomes MI6's man in Havana. He's not a spy, and he has no secrets to trade. So to make the deception work, he blows up pictures of vacuum cleaner parts and sends those as diagrams of the things that the Russians are involved with.
Yeah.
And people are beginning to think, well, they look like missile sites.
Yeah. And it's kind of...
Yeah. They think it's all dangerous Russian military equipment.
Yeah.
And it's a send up, really. I mean, Graham Greene sends up the security services and MI6. He also brilliantly sends up the dying days of the Batista regime in Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, that's very strange.
Very strange. So you don't really know what's, it veers really between being mundane and quite surreal. So some people are just bumped up to higher than their level of expertise, and other people are just bumped off, and you don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. Yeah.
Sounds like a great book.
It is. It's very, very entertaining.
Okay. Shall we go on to the next book?
Yes.
It is Do No Harm by Henry Marsh.
Yeah. Henry Marsh is a neurosurgeon in London. And when I say that settings are important to me, I don't mean just places. I mean settings like hospitals and so on.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I was drawn to this book is that in The Girls from Alexandria, Nadia is recovering from what she thinks is a brain biopsy.
Yeah.
To figure out what's wrong with her. So this is Henry Marsh, who does brain biopsies quite a lot of the time. And it's a memoir.
Yeah.
It's not his latest book. He's written quite a lot of books, but it is, I think, his most arresting. And I think there's something special about neurosurgery and neurosurgeons. They're surgeons, so they're a little bit gung-ho, like all surgeons, but not too gung-ho, because there's not so much leeway when you're chopping bits of brain.
Yeah.
So, and I think where Marsh excels, he's obviously a very good neurosurgeon, but I think where he excels is in his humanity and his empathy. And he tells it like it is via case histories. So each chapter has got a title, usually the name of a condition, like, glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain tumor. And they're case studies of patients of his at the St. George's Hospital Group, but he's fictionalized them, obviously. Although one chapter is all about his own mother's terminal illness.
Yeah. So is this a book that is, like, would anybody get a benefit from reading this book, or is this more for medically?
Well, I think anybody would, and it has been fated, I think, amongst booksellers and the book reading public. I think it has so much humanity and empathy. And yes, there are occasional long words like glioblastoma, but it's not packed with jargon at all. And there's also some wonderfully candid stuff. So I have to be careful what I say, but Marsh has got a patient who's totally obsessed with toileting.
Oh, okay.
And also what Marsh is trying to get across is the brain function and the tests and what's going to happen and so on. And the patient just goes on about bowel habits. And at the end, Marsh eventually says, "I couldn't give up about your bowel movements."
Yeah. Okay.
He's I have to say, I must tell you that he was a late entrant to medical school. He was a graduate in another subject completely. And I've been teaching at Imperial College for quite a few years, teaching medical students there. The graduate entrants really are more mature, I would say, noticeably. And what drove Henry Marsh to neurosurgery is his own son was very ill and actually needed brain surgery, had an emergency that needed brain surgery.
Well,
so he has a
it must have
personal
taken him a few years to train to do that operation.
Well, yeah, clearly somebody else dealt with the emergency, but it obviously inspired him.
Yeah. Okay.
So I definitely recommend this book. It's very moving, it's surprising, and it's full of humanity.
And we'll go to the next book, which is by an author I think a lot of people might have heard of, which is The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama.
Yes, well, I mean, again, he didn't start off by being an author.
No.
It's as for Henry Marsh, it's a byproduct of his day job. And I think, again, it's just stunning writing and filled with empathy. The subtitle says The Audacity of Hope, it's thoughts on reclaiming the American dream.
Yeah.
And it's more than that, though, because it's not just about the American dream. It can apply to anywhere in the world, I think. It's very fresh and very disarming. And his basic principle, as set out in the book, is the simple idea, and I quote, "the simple idea that we all have a stake in one another and that what binds us together is greater than what drives us apart."
Yeah.
It's not his first book, it's his second book, but it's my favorite.
Yeah. And did he write this after he was president?
No. No, did he? Yes.
Was this before?
Before.
Or
It was 2006. So before.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, because he became president in 2008.
Yeah.
In a way, you could think of it as his manifesto,
Yeah.
but it's quite fresh, and he comes along as very good-natured, idealistic, but also by his own admission, impatient and restless. And he always wants to campaign more, to do more, and that can be very hard on his family.
Yeah.
And he has a lot to say about family,
Yeah.
not just the children, but his grandparents, who looked after him and instilled values that guided him beyond. And as I said, it's very graceful prose. It's almost lyrical in places, and he comes across as someone who has empathy for people even when they disagree with him.
Yeah, which is an important thing that seems to be lost lately.
Yes. Yes, it is. I mean, I think to properly enjoy this book, I think you have to have some interest in US politics. But the things he writes about really are universal. For example, I mean, he does write a bit about what it means to be an African American or half African American, but he also writes a lot about the tension between individual freedom and the common good. So should the government monitor what we eat? Because we know obesity kills so many people.
Yeah.
That's debatable. What about free speech? And what about the death penalty? Now, he's against the death penalty, as are most people I know. And you can be against it, but then there are some crimes that are so appalling, you begin to wonder, well, yeah, but...
Yeah.
So he's writing about a lot of shades of grey, and I don't mean that fiction stuff.
Yeah. No, I don't think he is like into that kind of thing.
No.
There's a lot you can say about Barack Obama, good and bad. I don't think it's one of them.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I love this book.
Yeah. And we're going to go into a book that I probably can't pronounce the title of, but I'm going to have a go, which is Crossing Kalandia by Daniela Norris.
It's Crossing Kalandia by Daniela Norris and Shireen Anabtawi. And again, it's place and culture that drew me to this book in a way, although actually my mother gave me a copy of this book.
Yeah.
She gave me this book. And I think it deserves a really wide readership. It looks at the Israeli-Palestinian divide through the eyes of two women. And they're both mothers, they're both about the same age, and they meet by chance, literally on neutral territory. They happen to be in Switzerland at a party, and they're introduced to each other. And Daniela is Israeli Jewish, and Shireen is a Palestinian Muslim. And they both speak English, but they don't speak each other's language.
Yeah.
Even though both languages are Semitic in origin, they don't. And their friendship grows. It is based purely on liking each other as people and having similar interests, but they have very, very different cultures and very, very different homes. And Shireen says the only Israelis that she's ever met before she met Daniela, they were soldiers. And then from Daniela's point of view, she's so surprised when Shireen is so educated and well-spoken and well-dressed, because the only Palestinians that she's come across are definitely not. And after a while in Geneva, they each go back to their own homes. And Daniela goes back to Tel Aviv. And Shireen goes back to Ramallah on the West Bank. And they can't visit each other, or at least only with huge difficulty. So they write. And they write letters. Their letters are full of actually quite mundane things, like what their children are doing over the summer and, that kind of thing. But they also enlighten each other with details of their way of life, their religious festivals, and so on. Because they've never come across the other.
Yeah.
They've never spoken to the other side in an actual dialogue. And they begin to see the other side in a different light. Understanding grows. And I like to think it can cast out hate. Of course, these are just two individuals. But they're both very articulate writers. And I think it really has the potential to influence many, many more people.
So is this fictionalized, or is this real letters?
No, it's
that
real.
these
It's
two
non-fiction.
people, yeah. And they aggregated all the letters together in one book then.
Yes. And the book inspired the PEN initiative, Writers for Peace.
And what is Calandia?
Calandia is I believe the main checkpoint between the North and West Bank and Jerusalem. And it's a village that goes back to Byzantine times, maybe the 5th century.
Yeah.
There are lots of relics, old archaeological relics. And at various times it's had an airport. In 1949, it got a refugee camp. And since 1967, it's been under Israeli control. So the only way a Palestinian can cross it is if they can prove they have a permit for their work or their medical care or education or religious reasons. So these women would not be able to cross just because they want to have a natter.
And it's an unfortunate situation, isn't it? Really.
Yes, but I think I just love the way it doesn't set out to do anything important, but I think it does.
Yeah.
And they're just two people talking. And if two people can talk, why can't others?
Yeah, well, I think people often lose track of the power of finding out about normality, in a way, how people's normal lives go. So it sounds like an interesting read.
It really is, and it's well written. They're both good writers in their own right. I think for me, it also raises the question of what attracts people to each other. What makes you like other people? Do you like only people like yourself or not?
Yeah, you shouldn't, but I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, shall we go on to the next book, which sounds quite different, just knowing the author?
Well, it is, but
Just Like You by Nick Hornby.
This one. So this is fiction. So I had my little run of non-fiction. This is fiction, and it's the basic thing is actually what makes people attracted to each other.
Yeah.
And do people go for similar people in a relationship, or do they go for opposites? So this is Nick Hornby's story about dating that's set in 2016. So we don't have COVID, but unfortunately we do have Brexit and Trump.
Yeah.
So more, polarizing issues. And because it's Nick Hornby, you can expect it to be set in London, and you can expect some football and some music. So you won't be disappointed. There's a lovely cast of characters, and even the ones that make you cringe are actually wonderful. And then the good characters sometimes make you cringe too, because they make some quite hideous mistakes. It's written in a delightful way. The truth is, I've loved all of Nick Hornby's novels. So at one point, when a reviewer said my book Hampstead Fever had the observational wit of Nick Hornby, I thought, yes, I'll have that. Thank you very much.
So why did you pick that book over Nick Hornby's other book?
Well, it's the most recent one that I've read.
Yeah.
It happens to be a signed copy, but that's not why. The central relationship is between a white mum of two and a young black lad. He's 20 years younger than she is, and who's never had a family.
Mm.
So he's never been married, never had a family. And it's about what happens then. It's about subtle and not so subtle racism. And I think I've always admired Nick Hornby's touch, even when he's dealing with serious subjects. And in this book, he doesn't just deal with racism, he also deals with absent fathers, with alcohol abuse. And the rest of it, I've already mentioned, Brexit and Trump come into it as well.
Mm.
So I think it's his treatment of serious topics.
Yeah.
But I will say, don't expect a particularly tidy
Yeah.
ending. It's
Yeah.
not really a romance. It's a Nick Hornby book.
Yeah. Okay. So is it a Nick Hornby book for people who like Nick Hornby, if that makes sense?
Yeah. But how can you not like Nick Hornby?
Well, yeah.
That would be my basic premise.
Yeah. I think even I've read it. I can't remember what he's got a really famous book that was a film was made out of it.
Well, there were two particularly famous ones. Fever Pitch.
Yeah, I think that
about Arsenal, and I think that was mainly factual, actually.
Yeah.
And then there's High Fidelity, which was
that's
made
the one
into
I
a
was thinking
film
of,
with John Cusack in a record shop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to another one with a title that I can easily pronounce. Queenie.
Queenie.
The actual author's name.
I haven't got the book because I read it on Kindle.
Well, yeah. So people at Amazon watching this thing back, you read it on Kindle.
I read it on Kindle.
Yeah, and it's Queenie by Candice Carty Williams.
Yes, and I absolutely cannot work out how she managed to write such a funny book when it's really the story of one woman's low self-esteem. And the effect that it has on her relationships, her work, her entire life.
Yeah.
Queenie is black and in London. And some people have said, well, she's the Afro-Caribbean Bridget Jones.
Yeah.
But I think it's much more than that because it's so insightful. And despite it being really funny, there's a lot about how Black women are patronized, objectified, abused, passed over for promotion, assumed to be always up for it because they've got luscious lips and round bottoms, and how your appearance can affect your entire life.
Yeah.
I think that's a really serious point. And it doesn't just happen to Queenie, it happens to others that she knows as well. Queenie tries to do something about her problems, and she has therapy, but that proves to be completely useless. It misses the point completely. And in the end, it's friends and her family who help her help herself. And which actually, I think this is a general point that a lot of us could benefit from. I don't want to make out that it's too serious a book.
Yeah.
Because it is such a funny and witty read. It's not for those who are easily offended, though.
Yeah. So that's everybody now. So.
Well, it's it's not for the prudish.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that's probably.
But it's deservedly a bestseller, and I think it's going to be made into a TV program, and I can't wait.
How did you find out about the book? Was this recommended by somebody?
It was quite well publicised a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I follow Candice Carty Williams on Twitter.
Oh, okay. So it's a bit of a personal.
So she was definitely on my radar.
Yeah. Okay. Well, shall we go to your final book?
Yes.
Coming from Behind by.
Well, I've got to finish. I wanted to finish with something howlingly funny.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's plain and simple a howl.
Yeah.
It's Howard Jacobson's novel from 1983. I love his writing. Yeah. This one didn't win any awards, as far as I'm aware. And it's set in Wrottesley Polytechnic in the West Midlands.
Oh, we've had East Midlands now.
Yeah, well,
West
now we're
Midlands.
West
Yeah.
Midlands.
Yeah.
And Sefton Goldberg is an English teacher, Rottlesey,
Yeah.
whatever, Polly, can't say it. I can say Calendea, but I can't say the name of this Polly. He's an English teacher, and it's in the tradition, if you like, of Malcolm Bradbury's The History Man and some of Tom Sharp's books, but it adds a very Jewish dimension. So you can expect a lot of self-deprecation, and it's really quite delicious. The depictions of angst that people can face, especially when success happens to other people.
Yeah.
And disaster can befall you at any moment. He goes around, Sefton goes around with a feeling of impending doom.
Yeah.
Anything can happen. And so apart from being obsessed by his rival's successes, which are coming thick and fast, he's also afraid of anything that isn't Jewish enough, like football and nature.
Yeah.
And he has to balance whether he's more worried about football being a threat to his existence or nature.
Yeah.
I can't remember which he plumps for, but it's pretty funny stuff. It's erudite. Jacobson went to Cambridge and also taught there. But again, it's written with a very light touch that makes you feel and actually enjoy the pain that he's going through. So every disappointment causes Sefton pain. And he worries all the time that he's going to get another disappointment. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And, even when he's having sex, in fact, especially when he's having sex, he worries.
Yeah.
But he has a plan. He has a plan to deal with all this because he's no good at anything, he believes. He's going to write a book about failure. That he knows.
Yeah.
So he's going to write a book about failure. And you know what? It's going to be a bestseller. He predicts this.
Yeah. And it probably isn't.
I'm not saying any more.
Yeah, we don't want to spoil it. It's one of those like
it's a delicious book, really is.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is the last book, but the regular viewers, there probably aren't any regular viewers. We have got 3 people watching at the moment. They're not saying, somebody said "hey" spelt incorrectly in the comments a while back, but that was the sole comment we had. But I ask every guest what they would buy, and this is probably when I'm going to screw this up because I have to get the right. Let me change the overlay so it's not quite. Yes, the dream pick. So I ask every guest who comes on what they would buy from the Amazon store if money was no object, and you plumped for Steve Madden designer luggage.
Yes.
Hopefully that's come up. Yes. So why did you pick this? Like, money's no object. Why would you spend that on Steve Madden designer luggage collection?
Well, I guess I could have spent more, but this really fits the bill for me. Yeah. And from all the things that we've talked about this afternoon, I feel quite comfortable about traveling in time.
Yeah.
And I used to travel a lot geographically as well. There were a couple of years when my mother and I practically lived out of a suitcase.
Yeah.
Because we never knew where we were going next. So luggage was ever present in my life. But times have changed and I have not traveled very much the last couple of years. Most people haven't as well. Yeah. And I thought, right, well, when I get traveling again, I would really like some lovely luggage.
Mm.
And of course, it has to be red.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I suppose that fits in with the theming, doesn't it?
Yes.
So why this particular luggage? Was it just quick search on Amazon.com?
No, it's quite lightweight as well.
Yeah.
It's lightweight yet expandable. It's soft-sided and the wheels are in the right place. So I'm very fussy about that because you can start spinning like a supermarket trolley.
Yeah, that is true, actually. Like, if you can't wheel it properly, it's... I've made that mistake of having cheap luggage in the past. And,
yes.
I've been using like this Samsonite case she's got a nice little EU sticker on it. Ironically, I bought it before we left. So I keep like my EU approved luggage. So yeah, I think there is a lot to be said for investing in high quality equipment, right?
And colourful as well. So if you've got a dark case, a dark grey or black or navy case, it looks so similar to other cases of roughly the same colour, and you can quite often get to the carousel and find somebody else has made off with your luggage.
Oh yeah, black or brown. You can forget it. Yeah. Really. You need brightly coloured if you can get it.
Exactly.
All right, let's try and remove that, and then I'll work out how to put the thing back on. So to finish off the show, what is the future in terms of Dr. Carol Cooper's writing? Have you got any projects that you're working on? What's your next book going to be on? Either fiction or non-fiction?
My next book will be fiction.
Yeah.
And it will be set in the 1960s, mainly in Washington, D.C.
And that's because you live. Did you live in the?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's.
Yes. Yeah, I have a particular fascination for that time period, but I was there at a time that was very exciting, and I actually went to the March on Washington in 1963.
Ooh.
And I heard Martin Luther King make that speech, and I heard Mahalia Jackson sing.
Yeah.
And it's an impression that is a very long-lasting impression. In fact, I'll probably never forget that till the day I die.
No, I mean that's it's interesting when you're kind of how you can be mixed up with events and things. It's like when September the 11th happened, I was actually working on a project with somebody who was in the Twin Towers. Our other office was in the Twin Towers. So when you have a personal connection with an event, I think that makes a big difference. So
yes,
it sounds like you're going to have like that fantastic setting based on your own personal memory.
Yes, I don't set books in places that I don't know.
Yeah.
And as a doctor, I've been trained. You don't waffle when you don't know.
Yeah.
And I apply that to writing novels as well.
Okay. Well, it's not really allowed on Amazon Live, but how can people find out about you? If we whisper it softly, so yeah, I mean, obviously you've got an Amazon book.
I've got an Amazon author page, and I've also got my own website.
Yeah.
Which is quite simply drcarolcooper.com.
Okay. I think
you have to remember to put the doctor in. There are other Carol Coopers. I mean, there are other Dr. Carol Coopers as well.
Yeah. But you've got the main name. So, but yeah, in terms of your books and everything else, you are on. I think is it Dr. Carol? Are you down as Dr. Carol Cooper on Amazon, or are you Carol?
No,
Cooper?
just Carol Cooper on Amazon.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously, like at the bottom here, anybody watching on Amazon, there will be a couple of Carol Cooper's books, so you can just click on that, and then you can find her books, buy them. I'll get a affiliate cut, and you'll get lots of money paid because people have bought your books.
Excellent.
So everybody wins. Okay, well, thank you so much for being on the show today, and I'm going to gravel around and try and work out how to end the stream now.
Well, don't end it before I've thanked you very much, Tim. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a very enjoyable time, and thank you very much for having me and my books.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I mean, you are the the 8th guest on the show. But probably one of the most esteemed, to be honest.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and I'm going to end the stream now, and hopefully it will work correctly. Yeah, end the stream.